Welcome back to another episode of the Music with Matt podcast. I'm Wes.
And I'm John.
And this is the podcast where we explore all things music and how it intersects with people's lives and their day-to-day and their work, really.
That's right. And so what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to jump back into an episode with our friend Alex. And Alex is a writer, comedian, and also a musician. And the first part of this episode, we checked in kind of on the differences between him, you know, performing as an actor and then also performing in a band, and the sort of different notions of vulnerability, as it were, writing certain things for comedy and for music as well. So yeah, we'll definitely jump back into the episode.
Yeah, here we go.
I'm curious to know, when it comes to writing music, so you know, in the many years that I've known you, I've witnessed you as a drummer, as a guitar player, as a bass player. I don't know if you play other instruments, but certainly those three. That's the band right there.
Yeah.
So when you're writing music, or maybe even more so like thinking creatively about music and musical phrasing, what instrument do you find is the one that you use? Do you think of like the rhythm, kind of what the drums might feel like, and then maybe play something over top, or is it always from guitar, or like?
I think it's usually, I mean, it depends. It depends on what kind of song I'm writing. If I like, guitar is my like main first instrument.
Right.
Piano was my first instrument, but
Okay.
then I was like, because I was doing piano lessons with my brother when I was like 5 or whatever, and then I was like, to my parents, I was like, piano's not cool. Guitar is cool. I want to play guitar.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, fine.
Right.
That's fine.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. You're right, radical. But so guitar is my like longest playing main instrument. So a lot of the time, the seed or genesis for something I'm writing will be noodling around and then finding something compelling, chords or melodies or whatever.
Right.
And then that'll turn into one kind of thing. But I feel like that turns into one kind of song. Whereas if I just like conceive of like a melody or a lyric or something, then it's like vocal and melodic. And then I find chords to harmonize that.
Almost more like composition.
Yeah.
Like full
That's
composition,
songwriting.
like scoring something. Yeah. I see.
Well, no, that one's songwriting. That's like
I
if I like an idea for a song, as
Right.
opposed to a riff.
Right.
That I like doing.
Right.
Then I'm doing like riff rock if it's on guitar. But if I'm puttering around and something comes to me in my head and I record a voice note, then I pick up my guitar later and try and find chords to
Right.
go with this thing. Or sometimes, you know, drum beat too. I mean, drum beat's just like scoring often, or like more instrumental music often comes from a drum beat, because I'll be playing drums in the practice space and I'll be like, that's cool, and I'll just like record a voice note of it,
Right.
then import it into my computer and start layering shit on top
Very
of
cool.
it.
Yeah.
But so it's kind of different inspiration points generate different types of music for me, I guess, and
Right.
the different starting points inspire different process.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, there's so many different outlets that you have at your disposal, like being multi-talented and faceted like that. But going back to how you kind of got started playing music and that whole thing. So you started playing piano lessons, and obviously that wasn't for you. I stared the same way, by the way. I did piano.
I wish I'd kept it up. Like now I'm trying to learn piano again.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
Right. I hear that.
So like you were younger, you started playing, like how did you start playing in bands right away? You know, like your brother plays music. Did you start kind of doing all that stuff?
We played in church sometimes.
Right.
Played some Jars of Clay songs in church and stuff like that. And then in like high school, you know, met other kids who were like into the local pop punk scene.
Right.
And that's when I started playing in bands. Well, first I started being a fan. Like I started being in the scene and just being. I remember it blowing my mind that there was all of these people my age who all had bands that played shows that all had original music and were putting out records.
Right.
Like that I remember that blowing my mind that we're so, and because I grew up in Burlington, which is like has the 905 suburb scene, right? Which is a pretty massive scene with a lot of music and a lot of people doing it. So yeah, that's when I I kind of just like played guitar as a kid growing up, and then when I got into high school, met other punks and started going to shows, and then eventually weaseled my way into a band after being like a merch guy and all the other stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Hanging out
Just
and
going
being,
up the ladder of
being friends with bands, and then you know.
Sweet. Yeah, because that makes sense. And also, I feel like, I don't know if you would agree, but I found it's helpful to have sort of to be writing music in a pragmatic kind of a way. So if you're at home noodling guitar versus if you actually start playing in a band, then it's less like, oh, okay, now I'm going to just be creating riffs or song structures and things like that. Yeah, exactly.
Assignments and deadlines.
And that makes sense too, that would really like kind of like push you and like thrust you.
Well,
into
and also like that outcome of like, oh, well, if we write cool songs, we can go to these shows and be a cool band, and people will think we're cool for playing cool music at these cool shows.
Yeah.
Because I was just in awe. I was in awe of all these bands
The
that
whole
were
thing.
like, that like felt like professional bands to me, and were like, wild.
So then was it like a linear career path into your 20s into this space, or like did you go to something else and find your way back?
In high school, I was playing in punk bands, pop punk bands, and also doing a lot of improv at my high school. So I was doing both things. I was like, I was doing improv, but I was like, oh no, like my band's like, we're going to get signed and I'm going to tour and I'm going to do that. And then towards the end of high school, when that didn't happen, we showcased for labels, and there was a bit of like, oh, maybe, but it was never really serious. But so at the end of high school, when that hadn't happened, I went to Humber for comedy writing and performance, because it was the other thing that I was doing. And I didn't want to do a real program and get a real job. I wanted to keep doing one of the things I loved. So I also got into Sheridan for musical theater.
Wow.
But I was like, oh, if I go to Sheridan for musical theater, I'll probably stop doing comedy. But if I go to school for comedy, I'll still be playing in bands. So then I'll get to do both.
Right.
And I didn't want to stop doing one of them. So
that's a good move.
So that's what I did. I went to Humber for comedy, and then when my band broke up, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm doing comedy now. And I like focused on that for a few years. But then, you know, like Sunday Night Live, the sketch show that I did that John was in the house band for, I would always gravitate towards musicians and make friendships with musicians. And
you played with us in the band all the time.
The comedy show, the comedy shows that I would do, we would incorporate musicians, and then I would work with them or be friends with them. So it was just kind of that. It was like I had this love of music. Then I started pursuing comedy more seriously, and then I just kept going back to music and incorporating it into what I was doing.
Right. What was the first? So like high school, you know, you were doing the pop punk thing, and then it sounds like comedy kind of took a bit more of the forefront for a while. But what was the first musical group that you played in that wasn't pop punk? Like, what was the first type of music that you played in a band that wasn't pop punk? Is that too hard?
Orchestral comedy improv, was that?
Yeah,
which is remarkable, by the way. I think we got to bring that up again. But anyway, it
was great. I really don't know. I mean, I didn't really play. I don't know. I would just play music. You know, I went to a camp with Danielle Agassi, former friend of the podcast.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And we would play music all the time, just like acoustic guitars, campfire, you know, that kind of stuff. I used to.
She would rip Dave Matthews solos. I remember
100% Dave Matthews, nonstop Dave Matthews. I was never a huge Dave Matthews fan, but it was definitely in the water.
Until you're at a camp,
there's blood in
around
the
a
fire. Don't drink the water.
I could really feel those performance days coming back around the campfire.
Fucking Dave Matthews. But so I don't know. I played pop punk, and then I think I kind of like felt traumatized by my pop punk history, and then like was like put it away for a while.
Sure.
It was probably, I started doing these shows at U of T, these rock operas. My friend Henri Fabergé of Henri Fabergé and the Adorables, who were like this indie rock collective in Toronto a number of years ago. He had an artist residency at U of T, and they thought he was just going to like book some bands and do a variety show. But what we did was these massive 2-hour-long multimedia rock operas comedic rock operas, and we would write a new show every month and put on this big rock opera, serialized rock operas every month. And so that was like when I got into my next scene.
Right.
It was like I left the pop punk scene. I was like, put that behind me a bit. And then I fell into this scene of artists that were like performers, but like also a lot of musicians. He was a musician who wanted to do theater, so he got me and like Miguel Rivas,
Right.
Kayla Lorette, Roger Bainbridge, these other people to help him write these shows. And I would be singing, and I was doing drag. I had these drag queens that I would do in the shows, and I would play music with these other musicians, and that was amazing because that was how I got to like Gentleman Reg, who's incredible, who's like in Broken Social Scene and other bands. I feel like, and I got to sing with them and like play with people like Robin Hatch and
Right.
and Eric Woodhead of Doldrums at the
Right.
time, like those bands, and like Sean Nicholas Savage, like that whole Montreal scene of like kind of indie electro pop stuff that was happening.
Right.
And so that was the next kind of scene I fell into, to a lot of house shows and watch that music and
Interesting.
that kind
Okay.
of stuff,
Right.
and got to hang out and play a bit of music with
Right.
those people.
Right. So it was like a venture that was not just about playing different music. It was kind of like the whole package.
Yeah, it
And
was
then
it was a big freak crew. It was a big
Yeah.
rock opera.
Sounds awesome.
Creative. It was the best. It was the best.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the most intensely creative, collaborative,
Right.
wild, but artistically fulfilled period of my life. Probably.
Right.
We
Right.
killed it.
That's awesome. That is such a beautiful time. I feel like when you're just kind of like you got
Yeah.
that youthful energy and you're around
Yeah.
other creative people who have the same youthful energy and just the
Yeah.
things that you can do and opportunities that
The
come
stuff
up from
you're
it and
willing
stuff.
to do for free.
And that too, yeah.
Right. That's what it was. It was like some of the most talented people I know in a period of their lives where there was like, I don't care about anything except for just making something good.
Yep.
And I'll spend hours and hours and hours and hours on
Just
it.
honing the craft.
That's what we
yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And we made some
For
good
sure.
shit.
Yeah. And then like, up to this point, I'm kind of picturing you still being a guitar player, but I almost feel like I know you a bit more as a drummer. So when did you start playing drums?
I've always sat down at someone's drum kit, whether they wanted me to or not.
Alex, get out of the drum kit. Get off the drum kit.
Yeah. I always loved the drums.
Yeah.
I've always kind of been trying to pursue them, but like, I already like had a guitar and guitar lessons and stuff. So I never I had a little practice pads kit for a bit.
Right.
When I was still in the suburb as a high schooler, but then it was always the struggle of like, I feel like I've been trying to have a drum kit in my house for like 20 years.
Of course.
And it's always like, I get
no.
Yeah. Or you like live in a place where you can do that for a few months and then you move and you can't.
Yeah.
So like the drum kit at Comedy Bar is my drum kit, right?
Yeah.
Because I had this drum kit that I like couldn't use.
Yeah.
It was in storage. And
But
then
you're
it was
also like, I'm not going to get rid of it.
I'm not going to get rid of it. I've been trying to have a drum kit for so long.
Yeah.
And then, so
I hear that for
so
sure.
I've been kind of playing it or trying to play it for a long, long time, but it was really joining a band just prior to COVID, and then during COVID that I started having access to a studio that had a drum kit, and I
Right.
could go and really practice. And so I started doing that before COVID, and then during COVID, that was one of the things that kept me sane, was knowing that there was on Friday I could go play drums, and just like waiting for Friday every week, and then would go in and practice drums for several hours. And
you really dove into the craft and the technicalities behind playing drums.
I had just never played rudiments before,
Yeah.
and I never approached it like properly as an instrument or as
It was
a
more
musician.
just grooving and jamming or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
just sit down and mess around, and so I could play some basic stuff that I'd acquired over the years. But yeah, it was like, oh no, if I want to actually be good at this, if I want to actually be a drummer, because that's what people be like, oh, you're a drummer, and it's like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
No, I know drummers.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
They're drummers.
They're amazing.
Yeah.
Like they know they know the instrument.
Yeah.
I can sit down at a drum kit and whatever.
Like, I'm not a drummer. I'm just someone who plays drums.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm slowly, I feel like getting there to being like,
Definitely.
I'm a drummer, I guess.
Yeah.
I can kind of, but it was over COVID. I really would do all the stick control and rudiments and stuff,
Right.
and could practice with my hands at home on practice pads,
Right.
and then get my feet involved when I went into the space. And I've been it's been one of my more what am I trying to say? I've just been pursuing drumming more seriously the past few years.
Right. One of your more passionate or involved pursuits, creative pursuits.
100%.
As of late. Yeah.
But again, just like adding it to the repertoire of all the things that you do, right? Like nowadays, and we have this conversation with a lot of folks. It's like nowadays, to sustain a living in the arts, you kind of have to do almost everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So the more that you can kind of, I mean, master is the wrong word for it, but the more you can kind of get good at something, it just bodes well for sustainability.
And this also kind of along those exact same lines, this also led you to, you're mentioning this before, but start to explore recording. And that's also, it sounds like to me previously just sort of like a set of glasses or a certain hat that you'd never really worn before.
Well, it's similar with drums. It's like someone else had drums in their basement, and I was like, fuck, I wish I had that. I want to play those anytime I'm there.
Right.
When you would go into recording studios, I would be like, this is amazing. Like,
Yeah.
look at all this gear. Look at all this, the creative process, the studio process. I always loved so much.
Yeah.
And I felt like when I was younger, you didn't get to spend, you'd go into someone's basement who had a home studio there, and you'd pay them a few $100 for an EP or a day or whatever.
Yeah.
And you got a bit of a taste of that studio thing, but it was like pretty rushed and pretty like drums, guitars, whatever. That creative process of being able to be in studio and work on ideas and play with different techniques and stuff was always really exciting to me. So again, it's like when I started having access to studio space and started being able to have a drum kit, it was like, okay, now how do I record this? Like, I started learning about microphones, and I started buying microphones, and it's really exciting. The first time I got an old tape recorder, and the first time I just put an old tape recorder next to a drum kit. I think you were there. Remember, I got this little tape recorder, and I showed up to the bar, and I was like, I wouldn't shut up about this little tape recorder. I kept making Marshall record. I was like, I would put it next to Marshall, and I'd be like, play something, and then I'd play back, and I'd be like, can you believe how good this sounds?
You guys hear that?
Can you believe how good, like just like a shitty,
Like a cassette?
like a cassette,
Yeah, nice.
but like the tape saturation and the
Yeah.
like intense like compressor that was on this little onboard mic on the tape
course,
recorder.
Yeah.
It felt so funny to me putting up mics and trying to get a good drum sound. And then I put this tape recorder next to the drum kit one day and recorded it and was like,
That's the sound I
that's
want.
the sound.
Yeah.
I'm spending hours like
yeah.
compressing and EQing all these microphones. What I just want is the sound of a tape recorder next to a drum kit. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
For that
that project.
sound.
Yeah, for that project. Yeah. But it is also, these are all in terms of, as a drummer, I feel like you opened the Pandora's box of really focusing in on like the technicality of it. And then it's so interesting what a massive Pandora's box it is that you open when you get into the concept of recording and engineering stuff and microphones and the different types of microphones and microphone placement. And like you said earlier before we started recording, when you're like, I got these great microphones, and then I heard how crappy the room was and how bad everything sounded. Now you're like, oh no, now I got to like, redo the sound in this room or something like that.
But that's what's so exciting about it is that it all informs each other, right? It's like I never thought I thought my meter and my rhythm was good on guitar because I'd played it my whole life until I started like really practicing to a click with drums, and then I was like, oh, my meter was shit.
Right.
It was I had no meter. I was shit. And then taking that back to guitar and being like, oh, like I should be playing this more percussively. That's what makes things sound groovier and more in the pocket.
Sure.
So that informed that. And then with recording, it's like understanding frequency ranges and understanding where what you're doing as a guitar player or a drummer is going to end up in the mix. It's like understanding when you're directing, like when I wanted to learn how to direct film, my friends were like, you have to edit. Right? Because it's like, well, all the director is doing really is assembling the materials for the edit. The editor's who puts this all together and makes it happen.
Right.
So if you want to be a director, you have to know what you're doing, which is assembling those materials to be combined by the editor.
Right.
It's like a similar thing with music where it's like, oh, okay, if I'm going to mix this, I'm going to record and mix this. If I'm going to put microphones on the amp, it's like, oh, well, that's going to impact how I think about my tone and thinking about how I'm contributing to an arrangement.
Yeah.
Think about my internal like kick control of my mix of when I'm drumming.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that was huge.
Well, because I feel like the common misnomer is just that idea like, oh, we'll fix it in post.
We'll fix it.
We'll just digitize it, you know?
There's a producer. They've got all these compressors and all these EQs and a whole mixing board. It's like, no, man, like that's all work that you have to do.
Yeah, and it's
don't
like
create that work.
Exactly. It's like, and if it sounds like garbage going in,
yes,
it's going to be garbage in the back end.
Yes.
And it's like that's where I can see those similarities. How someone might say like, yeah, you're directing something. It's like, well, you need to have that perspective of kind of like what it looks like to have all of that stuff and then try to assemble it into a project. Yeah. You know, it's like, it's that same thing with engineering music.
Post-production just adds to the creative vision that's already established, right? Like if
you can sweeten,
exactly,
you can betterize it, you can put the polish on it and stuff like that. But it's
polish.
Like you can't polish a turd, as they say, and it's just totally true with recording.
And just in terms of drums too, it's like oh, I like putting all the microphones on drums and being like, I thought that'll sound good if I put a mic on every drum. It's like, no, it sounds like 8 different unglued drums, instruments, like really claustrophobic. And then finding out like, oh, the room mics sound what I think a drum kit sounds like. The sound of the full drum kit bouncing off of everything is what I think a drum kit sounds like. So then it's like, oh, okay, I want to crank those room mics. I want to compress those room mics and I want to crank them up. Okay, if I played the cymbals too loud, that sounds like nothing. That ruins it. So it's like, oh, okay, because I want to have this fat room drum sound and I want to crank the compression and use a bunch of those room mics, I have to play to those room mics and keep the cymbal noise down so that I can crank them and get that nice big reverberating drum sound. Yeah.
And that's just like the whole full circle process, basically, is what we're talking about right there. Having that perspective sort of like from both sides, you know, as a performer, the one that's like playing this stuff, to being also the person that's recording it and inevitably mixing it and trying to, you know, polish that sound.
And it's like navigating that sort of creative water, right? Like you don't know where this is going to finish necessarily, but you kind of have an idea of where you want it to go or what you might want it to be. So it's like having all of these tools at your disposal, whether it's being able to drum, guitar, be a comedian, write, direct, edit, all of these things just kind of all reinforce the same idea of kind of getting you to that final point and not necessarily knowing where it'll be, but at least you can get there in a way that's fully rounded, you know?
And having, like we were saying, like having those hours put in of like either actually recording and mixing the thing or actually being on stage to
doing it,
to doing it so that you're fluid and available. When it's like, oh, we don't know where this is going to end up, but I have a lot of experience with the techniques that we're employing or making stuff like this so that you can be responsive.
And it's so interesting how like the concept of practicing, it's like it's not actually the practice, it's the performance. It's like whatever that is, like even as an athlete, it's just like you practice all week, you train all week, but it's like it's really when you play the game that you learn everything and you see how those things kind of play into it. And it's so true. It's like, you know, I would say the same thing. More recently with what we do with MAP, where we like help people work on their songs and inevitably work more on like the recording and engineering side of it. It's previously I was like you, where I'd be like in a studio and doing stuff and being a part of the process and sort of communicating with whoever was recording to sort of reach that desired end goal together. But it's totally different when you're the one sitting in that chair, looking at the board, looking at all the different mics, hearing the different sounds, like being the one who's like, sorry, just keep hitting that kick drum for me. Like, you know, I haven't found the sound yet. And then meanwhile, the drummer's just like falling asleep going boom, boom, being like, what the heck's going on here? Whereas like engineer, you're like working away, being like, oh no, we haven't quite got it. Like adjusting the different like EQ bands or whatever. Like, so it's just like,
my favorite example is just how guitar players always want their guitar tones to sound huge and beefy and thick. And with all this low end, it's like, we're not going to use that. Do you know, like, do you like, it's not going to sound heavy. If we use all the guitar low end, then we have no bass.
There's no bass.
There's no bass.
Like mud.
And then it doesn't sound heavy. I know when you're in your basement and you play chug, chug, chug in front of your amp, it sounds good and heavy when that bass is cranked because there's nothing else. but that's not what it will sound like.
It's like if you're recording a guitar player and they say that, you're like, I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm pulling out all that low end.
Yeah.
And I'm going to save that for the bass. And the
because
bass drum.
that's going to make it heavy.
Yeah.
Your guitar is going to sound heavier.
It'll sound like a guitar.
Not heavy.
Yeah. It's going to assume the job of a guitar in the context of a band, not the bass.
Yeah.
Well, it's that collaborative piece, right? Like it all kind of comes full circle. But Alex, one question that we always bring up on the Map podcast, and a question that we just bring up in regular life all the time.
All the time.
What are you listening to these days? What kind of music?
I
are you
know
into?
for you this is a big question because
Yeah.
I feel like you always are listening to quite a variety of different things. Maybe not now. Maybe you went back to the pop
my
punk
problem
stuff.
is that I can never remember what I'm listening to when people ask me, and then I leave later and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm listening to.
Yeah. I know it is like a tricky one.
I shouldn't have said Dave Matthews.
I've been listening to there's a song called Seventh Element by a Russian pop singer called Vitas, and it's a bit of a
Vitas sounds
meme.
familiar.
It's like it's got a chorus that goes it's like a really weird song, and I've been listening to it a lot.
Okay.
Awesome.
I haven't been listening to it a lot, but my plug is always Mustafa the poet.
Right.
He's this singer-songwriter from Regent Park, Toronto, and he's a revelation and a generational artist. And everyone who hasn't listened to Mustafa, When the Smoke Rises, needs to listen to it right now and weep uncontrollably at the beauty and vulnerability of the record. Is there anything else I've been listening to?
I feel like this is many moons ago, but there was a time where you were really into like Japanese jazz music that sounded kind of poppy, and it was just like it came across
Midwest
as pop music.
emo jazz punk.
Yeah, like it came across as sort of light and fluffy pop, but like
That band's nuts.
wild time signatures.
That band's called Turiko.
Right.
Spelled Tricot, Tricot. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it exactly right, but Turiko is close to what it is. It sounds Spanish when I'm doing it. It's a Japanese. It's a Japanese word. They're wild, man.
Right.
They're this group of women who play like, it sounds like jazz, math rock, pop punk, and it's so impressive. They're playing like jazz chords and weird time signatures, but it feels like a pop song.
It feels like something you'd hear in like a dentist office, but also like if you actually pay attention to it, you're like, wait,
bonkers.
What is
Yeah.
happening? Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
What did they just do?
Yeah.
Like, they're wild. I really like them.
It was really cool. I remember you bringing that group to my attention too, and how it kind of played into like, because I feel like some of the hardcore bands you listened to when you're younger also had this sort of mathy kind of
I love that stuff.
odd time signature stuff.
To me, musicianship was always attracted me to stuff. It's why I was like in the pop punk scene, and then I got really into metal because when I would go to pop punk shows, some of the bands were good, but a lot of them were really shit and couldn't play their instruments.
Right. like really basic music was the absolute best that they could do.
Yeah.
Versus like a talented musician who's like just.
Then I would go to a metal
much.
show and I would watch 8 bands in a row where everyone was amazing.
Yeah.
And maybe the band wasn't great, but every musician in it could play.
their
The
instrument.
bar
Yeah.
seemed to be much higher.
It was wild. So then I started listening to Dillinger Escape Plan changed my life.
Yeah.
That Calculating Infinity. That record. Oh my
feel
gosh.
like I remember like at the drive-in.
Relationship of Command, Ross Robinson record.
Yeah.
Huge. I remember seeing, this was in the era when it was like, I remember seeing 5 to 10 seconds of an At the Drive-In music video on Much Music or something and being like, what's that?
Yeah.
That's so cool. I need that. And just going and buying the record based on seeing 10 seconds of One Armed Scissor because it seemed like the most chaotic, insane thing I'd ever watched. And then, that record was huge. Love that record.
Yeah. And then so I don't know, what have we left out? You ever mess around with any like classical music or anything like that, or?
A little bit. I think my ADD gave me. I think longer forms intimidate me.
Oh.
Because I'm like, I have to pay attention and take this all in and understand. And now, later in my life, I enjoy classical music and stuff like that a lot more, just because I'm not as stressed about like understanding it. I can just like listen to it.
Yeah.
Get whatever you get out of it. That's fine. I like bar talk. I like who else do I like? You know, the other stuff, the Philip Glass stuff, the John Cage stuff, all of those guys. Stephen Reich, all those weird freaks.
No, that's awesome. Even if you're thinking of
Satie.
I was just about to say romantic like piano players like Satie or even Debussy or Ravel are also
they're brilliant.
Yeah, just nice to hear chill piano stuff. I know what you mean too with classical music, where sometimes there's a certain intensity. Even actually, it's like sort of romantic era is when I feel like things kind of don't necessarily chill out more, but it's just like the pieces become a little shorter. They're a little less like in your face and stuff like that.
They're little pop tunes.
It's like way less of the like bam boom.
I also just think the presentation of it was so academic when I was younger. Like classical music was presented to me as like
inaccessible way almost. Like,
this is serious music. It's not to be enjoyed. It's to be understood and dissected and revered. And so I was like, oh, I don't know if I can crunch those numbers, but then. Musicals were also huge to me growing up.
Interesting. Of course.
Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera and Jesus Christ Superstar.
Right. Yeah. And for those, it was just the overall performance of it all. It's like fairly grandiose stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a
theater kid.
Right.
So that stuff really appealed to me. I mean, I guess that's the other stream that I didn't mention. Like in high school, I was also doing musicals. Like I was theater kid, improv, and then moonlighting as a pop punker.
Well, that makes sense because you mentioned that like improv theater thing. So like, I mean, that didn't come from nowhere. You're not just going to be like, I'll do theater. Sure.
Yeah. No,
makes sense. You had a little bit of a background there.
Bit of a ham, bit of an attention seeker. So yeah.
I mean, if you're young, I think that's akin to.
I think I was probably above the curve on attention seeking. Though still.
Well, you know.
Well, ultimately, like, again, appreciate your time, man. Great chatting with you. And I think it's been a cool exploration into, again, just reinforcing this idea of wearing these multiple hats, right? If somebody's serious about making a living in the arts or this industry, it's just being able to do as many things as you can and as many things as you can well. Yeah. And with thought and with practice and all of the above. So again, appreciate your time and thanks for hanging with us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thanks for the mug.
And absolutely, man. And you have to, anytime you're in public, you have to be seen with that mug now. It's just the contractual obligation you have with us.
I'm going to put it on a carabiner.
Nice.
like it's my keys.
Yeah.
Is that a travel mug? No, I do travel with it. It is not a travel mug, however. It's just a standard porcelain mug.
It's my fifth one. They keep breaking.
Yeah. Smashing on everything.
Yeah. Anyway, appreciate it though. It was great to talk with you, and kudos to you. You know, again, you like have a lot of cool stuff going on, and I feel like you don't take that stuff lightly. You really like take it on as something, you're passionate about it, but you also make a point of learning as much as you can about whatever the subject is or whatever the task is at hand, and kudos to you. Like that's not everyone does that. So, that's awesome that you take
that's nice
have
to
that
hear.
approach. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. Yeah.